There's a moment many parents never see coming. It doesn't arrive with shouting or harsh words. It slips in quietly like a shadow. One day, the child who once ran to you for comfort, who hung on your every word, now barely looks up when you speak. They interrupt you, roll their eyes, make decisions without including you. And the worst part? It's not just what they do, it's how it makes you feel. Small. Forgotten. Like you're slowly fading from a picture you helped paint. You lie awake at night staring into the dark, wondering how it came to this. You remember the sacrifices, missed meals, sleepless nights, every ounce of energy poured into raising them. You wonder, was it not enough? There's a heartbreak in feeling invisible to the very people you gave everything to. And yet you stay quiet, hoping things will change, not wanting to cause a rift. But deep down you know something has to shift. If that ache feels familiar, stay with me. Because this story isn't about loss, it's about reclaiming something powerful. In this video, we're going to explore 6 life-changing ways to regain the respect you deserve, not by demanding it, but by living it. If you believe in healing and rediscovering your voice and being seen again, not just as a parent, but as a whole person, please subscribe to our channel. Let us be your companion through the quiet and the chaos, a place to share, reflect, and grow stronger together. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which hurts more right now? A. Feeling like your voice no longer matters. B. Realizing your love has been taken for granted. Leave your answer in the comments, A or B. Let's talk about it because you're not alone. Now, without keeping you waiting any longer, let's get started. Especially the 6th way is expected to bring real results. Let's explore with us to change the present. The first, reclaim your voice. Stop seeking their approval. To rebuild respect, we must first look at how we may have unknowingly taught others to overlook us. Linda's story is where that realization begins, a path that takes us not through confrontation, but through self-honoring. There comes a quiet turning point in many parents' lives, a moment that slips in so softly you almost don't notice it at first. Linda certainly didn't. She had spent most of her life as a steady, powerful presence. She was the kind of woman who spoke up, who stood firm, who people listened to. But somewhere along the way, her voice began to dim, not because she lost it, but because she started hiding it. It began with small concessions, saying yes when she wanted to say no, staying silent during conversations she disagreed with, pushing aside her own needs so her grown sons wouldn't feel uncomfortable or criticized. She told herself it was love. She told herself she was keeping the peace. But in truth, it wasn't peace she was keeping. It was the illusion of being needed. The more Linda tried to stay agreeable, the more she disappeared from her own life. Her sons stopped asking for her opinions, assuming she had none. They made decisions around her, not with her. And worst of all, she started to believe that her presence only mattered when she was easy, flexible, accommodating. She thought that if she just kept showing up quietly and helpfully one day, they would notice her again. But they didn't. And the ache of being overlooked turned into a quiet grief. The first step Linda had to take wasn't to confront her children, it was to confront herself. To admit that the need for approval had quietly eroded her self-respect, and that to regain their respect, she had to first reclaim her own. She started small. She wrote down her thoughts in a journal just to hear her own truth again. She gave herself permission to decline things that drained her. She spoke up, even when her voice shook. And slowly, something shifted, not just in how her son saw her, but in how she saw herself. Respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you radiate. When you stop chasing acceptance and start standing in your truth, the people around you adjust. They listen. They pause. They begin to remember who you are. If you've ever felt yourself fading in the name of love, let this be your reminder: love doesn't require silence. And being a good parent doesn't mean disappearing. You still matter. You always have. It's time to believe it again. But finding your voice is only the beginning. Once you start speaking up, the next challenge is how you carry that voice, especially when it's met with resistance. This is where Walter's story reminds us of the quiet power of calm leadership. Walter had spent his entire life leading with quiet confidence. As a high school football coach for over 30 years, he was no stranger to pressure, disagreement, or strong personalities. But he never raised his voice to be heard. He earned respect not through fear, but through presence, through the way he carried himself calmly with conviction. People listened to him because he believed in what he said. And for a long time, that same steadiness carried over into his home. But as Walter got older, something shifted. His daughters, now adults with lives of their own, no longer looked to him as the steady rock he had always been. They began interrupting him at the dinner table, rolling their eyes when he voiced concern, brushing off his experiences as outdated. At first, he tried to push back. He reminded them of all the sacrifices he had made. He defended his opinions, argued his points. But every word seemed to fall on deaf ears. The harder he tried to make them listen, the more invisible he felt. That was the moment Walter realized something profound: respect cannot be forced through volume or repetition. It must be inspired. And inspiration doesn't come from frustration. It comes from clarity. So he stopped raising his voice and started grounding himself. When they interrupted, he didn't snap. He paused. And when they grew dismissive, he didn't retaliate. He responded with calm, steady certainty. At one particularly tense dinner, Walter waited until the noise settled and said, "I'll share my thoughts when you're ready to hear them." His tone wasn't sharp, but it was firm. And for the first time in a long time, they looked up, not out of obligation, but out of awareness. He hadn't demanded respect. He had shown what it looks like. The truth is, leadership doesn't end with retirement or aging. And your influence doesn't vanish just because others stop recognizing it. The most powerful form of leadership in this stage of life comes not from controlling others, but from mastering yourself. When you meet disrespect with grace, you teach others how to engage. When you hold your dignity like an anchor, even in stormy conversations, people begin to feel your strength again. If you've been struggling to be heard, don't shout louder, stand taller. The world and your children will listen when your presence says more than your words ever could. While Walter stood firm to be heard, Susan's battle was quieter. An inner ache that came from waiting, hoping, needing. Her story is a reminder that sometimes the respect we seek begins with letting go. Susan never imagined how lonely love could feel. She had given her daughter everything: her time, her energy, her unconditional presence. As a single mother and now a widow, Susan's world had always revolved around her child. And in her heart, that felt right. But something changed. The calls became shorter. The visits less frequent. The warmth once so natural began to feel distant, formal, obligatory. She started to notice how often she checked her phone hoping for a message. How many evenings she spent waiting for a call that didn't come. Sometimes she would invent excuses just to reach out, asking about the weather, a minor health complaint, or a forgotten recipe. It wasn't desperation, it was longing. She didn't want to burden her daughter. She just wanted to feel connected, needed, seen. But the more Susan reached, the more her daughter seemed to retreat. And that's when Susan had to face a difficult truth: emotional dependence, even when born from love, can feel like pressure to the person on the other end. And pressure creates distance. She sat with that truth not to blame herself, but to understand. Her need for closeness had started to overshadow her own sense of self. Her happiness depended too much on someone else's availability. That wasn't love. That was absence of self. So Susan made a choice, not out of pride, but out of healing. She began to rebuild her inner world brick by brick. She picked up hobbies she'd once abandoned. She started walking with a neighbor every morning. She attended a local history group where people listened to her stories with curiosity, not impatience. Little by little, she found herself again not just as a mother, but as a woman with a full and independent life. Something unexpected happened. Her daughter began to call more, not out of guilt, but out of genuine interest. She asked questions, listened longer, even visited just to see what her mother had been up to. The dynamic shifted because Susan had shifted. She was no longer waiting to be fulfilled by someone else. She was already full. If you've felt invisible without your child's attention, remember this: you are still whole. Your worth does not depend on being needed. When you stop chasing love and begin cultivating it within those around you, feel it and they're drawn to it. Build a life so meaningful that even your silence speaks of joy. Once you've found yourself again, as Susan did, the next step is learning how to protect that self with love and firmness. Edward's story shows us how boundaries don't break relationships. They build respect. Edward had always taken pride in being the steady hand in his family, the calm voice in a storm, the quiet listener, the one who never raised his voice. As a retired architect, he valued structure, clarity, and the long view. But somehow, in his personal life, his patience had begun to backfire. His adult sons, though not intentionally cruel, had stopped treating him with the respect he once commanded. They spoke over him during conversations, rolled their eyes when he voiced concern, and made decisions as if his opinions were outdated or irrelevant. For years, Edward said nothing. He told himself it wasn't worth the fight, that staying silent kept the peace. But inside, something was slowly unraveling. He began to dread family gatherings, feeling invisible in rooms he used to lead. He'd return home from visits exhausted, not from noise, but from holding so much inside. One evening, after a particularly dismissive comment from his eldest son, Edward sat alone in his study and admitted a painful truth to himself. The peace he thought he was preserving wasn't real. It was built on the quiet erosion of his own voice. That realization changed everything. Edward didn't lash out. Instead, he made a firm decision to no longer participate in conversations where he was disrespected. He chose not to argue, but to clearly state his expectations. The next time his son interrupted him, Edward calmly said, "I'll continue when I feel I'm being heard." No anger, just clarity. When his opinion was dismissed, he responded, "You're free to disagree, but I deserve to be respected." At first, his sons didn't know how to respond, but Edward didn't waver. He didn't punish, but he didn't retreat either. Over time, something shifted. His presence began to carry weight again, not because he forced it, but because he stood firm in his value. Boundaries are not barriers. They are invitations. They say, This is how I ask to be treated so we can keep walking this road together with love and mutual respect. If you've been tolerating too much for the sake of harmony, let this be your reminder. Peace without self-respect isn't peace at all. You can love your children deeply and still protect your dignity. In fact, that's the most powerful form of love, one that teaches others how to honor your presence, not just rely on it. Boundaries are one way to reclaim your space. But what happens when the boundary isn't around your time, but your generosity? Marvin's story reminds us that even the most selfless giving must come from a place of self-respect. Marvin believed that giving was the highest form of love. He didn't just provide, he offered his time, his money, his presence, often without being asked. Whether it was fixing a car, covering a surprise bill, or dropping everything to help one of his kids, he did it without complaint. At first, it felt like connection, like purpose. But as the years went on, something inside him began to shift. The gratitude grew quieter, the thank yous came less often, and the requests, they never stopped. It was a quiet disappointment at first, easily brushed aside with a laugh or a, "they're just busy." But it deepened with time. One birthday passed without a single call. Another week went by with 3 separate requests for help, and not one of them included a question about how he was doing. Then came the moment that changed everything. Marvin needed help after a minor surgery. Only one of his 4 children showed up, and even that reluctantly. Sitting alone in his living room, Marvin realized he had taught his children something dangerous, that his generosity had no limits. And as hard as it was to accept, they had started to see his giving not as a gift, but as a given. He hadn't meant to create that dynamic, but by never setting limits, he had quietly erased the value of what he gave. That realization didn't make him angry. It made him resolute. He didn't want to stop being generous, but he wanted to give from a full heart, not an empty one. So Marvin changed the way he gave. He started asking himself, does this feel like love or like obligation? He offered help when it felt right, not out of habit. He said no when he needed rest. And instead of always solving problems, he started teaching his children how to solve their own. At first they were confused. One even accused him of being selfish. But Marvin didn't back down. He stayed kind, but he stayed firm. And slowly they began to treat his time and energy with more care. The respect returned not through guilt, but through clarity. If you're feeling unappreciated, it's not too late to shift. Your giving should lift you, not drain you. When you give with grace, not out of fear or duty, you remind others and yourself that your kindness is powerful because it is chosen, not expected. After years of offering so much to others, the question becomes, what have you saved for yourself? For Diane, the answer began with a single decision to stop living around her children and start living for herself, live a life that inspires, beyond parenthood. Diane never expected the silence to feel so loud. When her youngest son moved out, the house felt unfamiliar, still warm, still hers, but missing the heartbeat of daily purpose. For years, her days had revolved around her children. Their needs became her calendar. Their worries became her own. And in that rhythm, she had slowly forgotten what her life sounded like without them at the center. At first, she tried to stay involved. She called often, asked about his work, reminded him to rest, to eat well. Sometimes he responded with affection, but more often the replies were short, distracted, or delayed. He wasn't being cruel, he was just living his life. But Diane, who had poured herself so completely into motherhood, began to feel like she was on the outside looking in. One afternoon, after leaving another unanswered voicemail, Diane sat by the window and faced a difficult realization. She had built her world around people who were no longer building theirs around her. And the truth stung not because she regretted loving them, but because she had neglected to keep loving herself along the way. It would have been easy to feel bitter, but Diane chose something braver. She decided to live not just wait. She joined a local community garden. She signed up for a painting class at the senior center. She reconnected with old friends over coffee. These were not grand changes, but they were hers. And with each small decision, she started remembering who she was outside of being mom. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Her son began calling more often, not out of duty, but curiosity. He asked about her class, her friends, her thoughts. He began to see her not only as his mother, but as a person with her own life interests and spark. Diane had stepped back not to withdraw, but to expand. And in doing so, she made space for a new kind of respect. If you've been living only through your children, know this, your story is still unfolding. You are not just someone's parent. You are someone. When you live with purpose, you remind others that your life is valuable, full, and still beautifully yours. The greatest way to be honored is to first honor yourself with time, with intention, and with joy. Diane's quiet courage closes this chapter. But the truth is, your story is still being written. And the next part, it's yours to claim. Looking back at the lives of Linda, Walter, Susan, Edward, Marvin, and Diane, we don't just see stories, we see a mirror. Each of them reached a point in life where love had become laced with pain, where their years of sacrifice and devotion were met, not with cruelty but with silence, dismissal, or forgetfulness. But none of them stayed stuck. Instead, they each made a choice to reclaim something sacred, their self-respect. Linda rediscovered her voice. Walter led not with loudness but with dignity. Susan let go of emotional dependency and found joy within. Edward drew the line with grace and re-earned his place at the table. Marvin gave from strength, not obligation. And Diane chose to live not for approval, but for herself. Their journeys remind us that respect from our children is not something we must chase. It's something we embody. It begins when we stop trying to prove our worth and start living it. When we speak with honesty, set boundaries with love, and choose fulfillment over fear, something remarkable happens. Our children begin to see us not just as parents, but as people worth admiring again. So if you're standing at that crossroads feeling invisible, unappreciated, or quietly heartbroken, remember, this is not your ending. It's your invitation to rise, rebuild from within. Choose yourself not out of resentment, but out of wisdom. You have everything it takes to shift the dynamic, and the moment you begin, respect will follow. Here's a question just for you. Which action do you feel most ready to take today, A? Setting a clear boundary. B. Doing something just for yourself. Comment your answer below, A or B. We'd love to hear where you are on your journey. And now, what about you? What part of this message spoke to you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone out there may need your story to feel less alone. If this video stirred something deep within you, if it made you feel seen, understood, or simply not alone, please consider subscribing to our channel. Let us walk beside you as a steady companion, sharing real stories, heartfelt guidance, and gentle encouragement through every season of life. Your support isn't just appreciated, it fuels everything we do and inspires us to keep creating meaningful content for people like you. To tap the like button and hit subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we share. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll be the first to know when a new video is here to uplift, inform, or simply sit with you in the quiet moments. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.